So yeah, the talk is called Imagination and Awakening the Heart, and I'm particularly interested to talk about this subject because, I've just been fascinated by the imagination for many years. I practice as a painter, and I've been practicing as a Buddhist for many years. So really the spirit of this talk is informed by my teachers. So I'm just sharing the experience really that I've gained from putting that into practice. So I'm going to be talking about and be exploring the theme of imagination and how it relates to Buddhist life, and to share some reflections from my own experience as well on that. So I'll just start with a quote from Bhante Sangharakshita. You might hear me speaking about Bhante or Sangharakshita. Bhante is a sort of appreciative term of a teacher. So Sangharakshita is the founder of the Triratna Buddhist order and movement, the community, and this is a quote from him. So it's from a text called Creative Symbols of Tantric Buddhism. So he says, the spiritual life is about trying to find more significance in daily life. When you can do that, there is never a dull moment. This is the experience of mystics and meditators who speak of seeing literally everything as being lit up from within, glowing with light. Light, significance, meaning, inner depth, symbolism, it all amounts to the same thing. In a certain state of mind, everything you see has significance. Not that the significance is reducible to a conceptual meaning, it's just significant. So through the imagination, we can start to experience our daily life in new ways, in fresh ways that give it an added meaning and significance. So you're probably all aware or conscious of the subject of imagination as being a vast one, and throughout the history of time, as far as I know it, there have been people have tried to make sense of what the imagination is, and there are many definitions of the imagination, and none of them that I can see are sort of definitive. None of them are sort of complete in themselves, but for the purposes of this talk, I'm going to be drawing on some recent discussions and conversations that Sangharakshita, the founder of the Triratna Buddhist order movement, has been having with one of our senior order members called Subhuti on the theme of imagination. So it's really, Sangharakshita's really trying to just give us a whole new way of looking at things in terms of the imagination. So there's a new emphasis that's coming out at the moment, which is quite interesting. So it is actually very hard to talk about something that isn't conceptual. So I'll give it a go, and I'll illustrate it as well with pictures. So that might help us to get a sense of this quality of imagination. So Sangharakshita himself has a very high regard of the imagination. He's a poet, and he's also a scholar. So he's a poet and a scholar. And from his memoirs, he's written memoirs from significant periods of his life, and within that, he's revealed quite a lot of mystical experiences as well, where he's encountered other realms and other beings which, as far as I can see, he would regard as actually existing in themselves. So he's had these encounters himself. And his inspiration for the theme comes from, his knowledge of Buddhism and to some degree Western philosophy, but probably most of all, probably most of all through Buddhism, but also perhaps even equally through Western art. And probably a lot of you here know the artist William Blake, and he draws a lot on William Blake's ideas of the imagination, and also Coleridge, if any of you are aware of the artist and thinker Coleridge. So he draws from largely from those two in his thinking. So I'll just read a couple of things from these recent conversations that he's been having. So he says, imagination has direct access to its objects. So in contrast to reason, which deals with concepts derived from experience, so it's like second-hand almost, imagination has direct access to its objects. So it's he also says it's a means of knowing. He's described imagination as being something that is more than the individual. So he says sometimes in creative process, and this can even be, when we're having conversations with people, or when you're looking at a sunset, any kind of inner creative process where we are in dialogue with other, whether it's a person or a sunset or a piece of art. So when one's engaged in creative process, one cannot say that the poem or painting or music or communication came from oneself. When the imagination is active, you could say the creation itself, or what emerges through that interaction, seems to have a will of its own. The creation, he says, seems to will itself. So there's something about imagination as being more than the individual in the sense that he's talking about the imagination. If you're familiar with Sangharakshita's teachings, he's talked a lot about the imaginal faculty as being a synthesis of emotion. So it engages emotion and it engages reason, but the imaginal faculty or imagination, when it's active, when it comes to life, is like a synthesis of emotion and reason onto another level. So it engages those faculties that we have, thought and feeling, but it's kind of not defined purely by either one. He also, if you're familiar with Sangharakshita's teachings, he also, in his text, Mind Reactive and Mind Creative, he relates imagination as the creative mind. So that's spontaneous, awake, aware, alive, immediate. Probably the most important thing about it, or one of the most important things, is that we've all got it. So you don't need to be worrying about whether you've got it or not. We've all got it. It's innate. Imagination is innate. It's just a case of finding ways of tapping into it, evoking it in oneself. And we've all, in a way, it's quite exciting, the prospect of engaging with imagination, because we're all wired up quite differently. And for some people, you'll experience it through the kinesthetic, through movement, through energy. Through others, it would be mainly the visual sense, through seeing a beautiful sunset or a piece of artwork or something. For others, it would be through touch or through sound. I think a lot of people access imagination through sound. So all of our senses can be gateways for the quality of imagination that I'm describing at the moment. So in a way, we can it's up to us to explore, well, what senses for me are the strongest, which gateways are the strongest for me, and we're all a bit different. Just carrying on for a moment in terms of the definitions that Sangharakshita has been talking about recently, he has said that we can engage with the imagination at ever increasing levels of intensity. So imagination at its greatest can be a direct experience of reality. He can say that, he says that at its greatest it becomes what's called illumined, what he calls illumined. I think also Blake and possibly Coleridge calls it illumined as well. And this is where we are permeated by reality, by beauty, by radiance, by reality itself. So this is akin to the enlightened mind. So he's seeing it as, the way that he's talking about it is that it's a faculty that we can develop that can actually take us to complete awakening, to complete enlightenment. So that's its furthest reaches. Just to flesh that out a bit more, he says that when imagination is in this, has this quality of illumination, it transforms all experience into symbols. So you may have had a taste of this, and probably all of us have had a taste of this, where you just get this sense of things holding significance and meaning. So this is a taste of the illumined imagination, where the deepest significance in things just seems to be manifesting. That's when the experiencer, when oneself and the experienced, the subject and the object come into closer interaction. So there's this sort of, there's this resonance. There's a resonance or a symbiotic relationship between oneself and what one is engaging in, whether it's a person or a piece of some landscape that you're just responding to, etc. So T.S. Eliot talks about that as being the dance. So where one feels then as though one is participating in a dance of conditionality, in a dance of phenomena. So in London, at the City Lit, I run courses on the imagination and creativity, painting. And what we do at the beginning of those courses is that we all try and we all bring to mind an experience that we've had, a kind of experience that I've been describing, of a sunset, a piece of art, an experience in meditation that, where one has felt as though there is that participation going on. And I just marvel at the fact that everyone just seemed to be able to connect with it. Everyone. So I would just invite you in your own time to just reflect on that and see what comes to mind. One of the things which all these intellectuals, Sangharakshita, C.G. Jung, Subhuti has also mentioned this, and I think Coleridge mentions it as well, is that play is the basis of imagination. So, just play. So you all know what it's like to be a child. So this play, in a way, play is where we arrest trying to get somewhere. We arrest wanting things, and we can just relax back into ourselves and see what emerges. And things just tend to emerge, don't they, when you're playing? And for some of us it can be quite hard to play, but it's also quite a nice invitation to think of play. Oh, thank goodness, play is the basis of imagination. So, and if I suppose we were just thinking about our ordinary lives, we're expressing imagination all the time in what we wear, in how we communicate to one another, in the way we decorate our homes. And I think allotments are also quite nice places for to see how people express their playfulness and their inner richness. So one thing also that's been coming out of the recent teachings on the imagination is imagination and empathy. So I'll just read this quote. I'm not going to go into this fully here, but I'll just need to highlight. I just think it's worthwhile just mentioning this quote. So this is from the recent conversations that Sangharaj has been having with Subhuti. So solidarity with all life, a direct recognition of the same life in the beings around one that one knows in oneself, is essentially an imaginative act. Something more than a kind of reasoned reflection, although of course reasoned reflection might be a means of awakening that empathy. But imaginative empathy is direct and it's intuitive, without thought. And one might also say it's instinctive. So I've practiced as a painter and a Buddhist for 16 or 17 years, and over the years have worked out how not to work with imagination. So I've really, learnt. I've burnt myself. Let's say I've screwed up many times working with imagination through painting, and I just wanted to share a few of those things with you. So I think what I've come to realise is that our motivation is probably one of the most important things when engaging with, if one wants to take up a spiritual practice, a Buddhist practice, then intention from a Buddhist perspective is crucial, it's central. And for many years I think what I was doing was for a few years, what I actually wanted was I wanted to have particular experiences. So I wanted to, in a way it was like getting off my head or getting out of my head through the imagination. So if you like, creating an experience which actually did seem to take me away from what is quite ordinary and beautiful and natural and human. And in some way I found that I wanted to sort of gain control, to master, to just manipulate my experience so that I could have a particular experience of pleasure or excitement or something. And just using the imagination to avoid just the very naturalness of being who I was. who I am. And I noticed that this didn't actually bring me any happiness at all. So it was almost as though I was, creating all these paintings and having all these wonderful meditation experiences, and I was like putting them on me as trophies. It was like, hey, this is going to bolster up who I am, who I think I am. And, I'd then sort of wear it and go around as though it was, and actually I found that it became armour rather than anything that was enjoyable or natural or connecting. And I think it increased my fear, because I was actually cut off from myself, and I had to sort of maintain this idea of who I was and what I was. So, and how I noticed this happening was that there was always some kind of story, always some kind of idea or something supporting the experience that I was having. There was always some sort of storyline going on. Oh yes, aren't I great, or who's looking at me? And I realised after a while, what I'm coming to realise is that through just relaxing and letting go, that is the way to really engage more fully with this quality of imagination. So it's a kind of a non-doing or a non-fabrication. We actually don't need to create anything in order to feel more truly human, more truly alive, more truly ourselves. It's almost like there's just a letting go that needs to happen. Okay. So I'll just talk a little bit about some paintings that I've got here. What I've learned is that in terms of working with imagination to, if you like, to allow one's heart to become more awake and more natural and more true, what I've learned is that intuition is a very valuable inner guide. And I'll just read a couple of things here on intuition. So our inner guidance or intuition senses the direction to go for the most benefit. It has an awareness of our motive and intention, and it chooses what will cause the least fragmenting in the psyche. So I think that's something quite interesting to look out for when we are engaging with imagination, just thinking, what seems like the path of wholeness here? What seems like a path that causes the least fragmenting in the psyche? That's actually a quote by Clarissa Pinkola Estes, who wrote Women Who Run with the Wolves. Okay, I'll leave that one. So so when I'm painting in the studio, when I'm painting in the studio, I dedicate the day to what I dedicate it to kindness, to metta, to being awake. And I just want to read this. It's an absolutely beautiful quote by Lama Anagarika Govinda. It's from a book called Creative Meditation and Multidimensional Consciousness, if you can remember that. And this is one factor or one faculty that basically guides my intuition when I'm working with imagination. So he's talking about the quality called Hri. And he says the literal meaning of Hri is to blush, which consists in taking on the colour of Amitabha. Some of you may be aware of Amitabha. Hri is Amitabha's seed syllable. And the literal meaning of this seed syllable Hri is to feel shame. So in the Pali Abhidharma, which is the early text of Buddhism, Hri takes the third place in the list of wholesome or beautiful factors of consciousness, next to faith and mindfulness. So if we analyse the psychological origin of the feeling or innate faculty of shame, we shall find that it's based on the noblest quality of the human character. He says, namely, an inborn sense of values and responsibility. So he says that this quality of Hri is the strangest and most subtle of phenomena, in which the deepest forces of the human soul act independently of our desires, our will and our intellect. So he says, what is this mysterious, intangible force? And he goes on to say, it's the inner voice. It's the moral law, he says, the Dharma within us, this sense of, this quality of Hri, the inner voice, the voice of conscience, of inner knowledge, Bodhi, not the intellectual, but the intuitive, spontaneous knowledge, due to which we do the right thing without expectation of reward or advantage. So I just find that deeply, deeply, deeply inspiring, this quality of Hri. And so when I'm painting, in my life generally, but when I'm painting, I do dedicate the day to, if you like, just becoming more sensitive to that inner voice of conscience, or inner conscience. And so I will just talk about the paintings for a few minutes, and hopefully from your own experience you'll be able to relate in your own way, from your own experience, to what I'm going to be describing in a very personal way. So this painting's called Light Mandala, and I'd had an experience in meditation which was very, very light. And it's so unusual for me to have an experience that's so light. And I just thought, well, I'll just try and paint it. Usually I like a bit of grit in there, a bit of darkness, something to sort of give it a bit of welly. But I just thought, right, I'll just try doing something just about light and see what happens. And as I was painting it, I just had, in a way, I don't know how successful it was, but I found it quite beautiful. I remember one time I was painting away, I was just sort of smiling as I was painting these birds. They're actually birds circling round, and there's one bird, they're all sort of circling round together, and there's one bird that is exiting the spiral. So it's sort of entering into a new realm, let's say. And it's characterised as 3 eyes there, sort of signifying the exit point. And these are suns and moons that are sort of radiating out from this, this incredible beauty and light that was going on. And so what I notice about beauty, about the act of painting, and I'm usually quite conscious about following, not only following my conscience, but also looking for the wholesome and looking for beauty through the painting process. And what I notice is that I also then open to pain. So you can't, in a way, wouldn't it be nice if we had just pleasure, if everything went our way, if we had no problems, etc., etc., etc. Probably we've all given up on expecting that. And one thing I found very liberating about coming across Buddhism is that it does address the reality that pain is just part of life. We don't have to keep denying that anymore. It's just like pain is part of life. And I think I used to have the view that there was something wrong with me if I was experiencing pain, or if I was feeling inadequate, if I was feeling like something wasn't complete. And I sort of think, I don't have to worry about that now. Of course I'm going to feel that things are not quite resolved, or pain is going to be part of my experience, and can let go of feeling bad about it. So this painting here, it's called, actually I've changed the name of it, it's got a few titles. She's a wisdom goddess. I was painting a series of wisdom, of goddesses at that time, during a particular phase of my life, quite recently. And this one is called Wisdom Goddess. It used to be called Blue Tara of the Ocean Mantle. She's standing at the bottom of the ocean, and she's blue. And whilst I was painting this particular figure, I did a whole series of goddesses. And what happened with this one was that I started, whatever was going on in my life at the time, I started to encounter quite a lot of pain, and it felt deep, felt really deep, and it felt really painful. And I just asked the question, can I let this in? And sometimes I decide, no, it's too big. I'm not going to let it in. I'm going to protect myself, and I'm going to focus on beauty. I'm going to focus on something that's going to give me more resources to engage with my experience, But on this occasion, I thought, I can let it in. I can let this pain in. And so I did. And intuitively, my conscience was telling me that I was protected, and I was protected by the colour blue. That's how I experienced it. I was protected by the colour blue. And I just want to read this short quote, which completely made me laugh when I found it. This is Sangharakshita. He was asked once, okay, I'll just read it. He says, I remember quite a few years ago, someone asked me what it is that one experiences as the result of doing the visualization practice of green Tara. So this is a figure from Buddhism, green Tara. She's green. And so you imagine her, you engage with this figure in a variety of ways. So he was asked, well, what's it like doing that practice? And he said on that occasion, on that occasion, I replied that what one experiences is the spiritual equivalent of greenness. So, he says, one might say that the colour becomes a sort of vehicle for the experience of a spiritual quality. So a spiritual state which the colour symbolises. So I just found this completely liberating, that I could sit there. I mean, actually, Green Tara is, at ordination I received the visualisation practice, and Green Tara is my practice. I can sit there and just feel the colour green, and if it really is resonating with me, I sort of know, you sort of know it, don't you? You know when something's resonating with you. And so what I do, and what I do in the painting, is just allow that resonance to pervade more and more of my experience, and let the colour just have its way, really, have its just let it have its influence. So I found that completely liberating. And Buddhism, of course, is full of these, such a rich body of symbolism. You've got the mandala of the 5 Buddhas, and they've got times of day attributed to them. They've got colours, they've got animals, and they've got various mudras, various hand gestures. So, in terms of finding imaginative ways to be reminded of the conceptual, the ideas of Buddhism, it can be just a very, very enjoyable way of engaging with, with sometimes quite complex ideas. Once, and one can do that through just looking at images or symbols, or through taking in a particular time of day, whether it's the morning or the at sunset or midnight. I think I will just draw it to a close now. I just want to bring to mind this image, the image of the Buddha. Just thinking of the Buddha as a symbol. If you bring to mind the image of the Buddha seated there, his legs are in, the traditional image of the Buddha. His legs are in the Vajrasana posture. So that is the symbol of the Vajra, embraces opposites. You could say embraces pleasure and it embraces pain. It embraces, all the opposites. It embraces the wisdom and it embraces our ignorance. And the Buddha is seated with that very firm base, very solid, but also very, very open. And I suppose what I'm trying to communicate through this talk is particularly engaging with pleasure and pain. For some of us, actually, beauty and pleasure can be the hardest things to let in, because it changes us, doesn't it? It's like we're not necessarily we don't deserve it. Do we deserve it? And we might have the view that we don't actually deserve incredible beauty. So, we're surrounded by it. So, at this festival at the moment, the lovely sun. So, what I'm trying to encourage you to think about is that when we do embrace both pleasure and pain, that it can be just an opportunity really to join humanity, rather than doing what I was doing for quite a few years, which was trying to avoid the pain and go after particular kinds of experiences through meditation, wanting particular meditative experiences, wanting to wear all these things as trophies, which actually just became dirt bowls, which just became rusty and really not very helpful for anyone.